Welcome everybody to the Latin Nerds Network. My name is Jose and this is my review for Elvis. That's right, the icon, one of the most iconic performers in our history. Elvis Presley. This guy died back in 77, so it's almost 45 years ago, and his name, his brand, his persona is still relevant, right? He's still a known commodity, and that speaks volumes about who Elvis was and what he meant as, not only as a great performer, but his impact on popular culture. So, again, I didn't grow up with Elvis. Is way before my time, so I can't say I'm an Elvis fan. I like some of his music. I know who he is, and obviously, I recognize the figure itself and his importance. So I didn't have a horse in the race here. And usually with biopics, right? Your enjoyment of the biopic really depends on your investment of how much your investment in the subject matter. In this case, Elvis. For me, it's kind of a casual fan, I guess, if I go as far as to say that. But that being said, here, with most biopics, they're all pretty standard for the most part, particularly when it's a musical biopic, a music biopic anyway. And they chronicle a life from the beginning to end for the most part, and a lot of them are very focused on the style of a substance for the most part. And I don't think this movie is any different. But I'll get to that in a second here. I'll say this because it's worth mentioning that first and foremost, the Austin Butler who plays Elvis Presley is great. This is his first big break, his first really big film as a lead, young guy, and I think this is going to springboard him to much bigger roles or other big roles down the road, because he deserves it. He was really good in this film, man. Very magnetic, really embodied the persona of Elvis, who he was, and a very nuanced performance as well. He was really just magnetic on screen, very electric on screen, and it kind of reminded me a lot of Rami Malek. When he did Bohemian Rhapsody, of course, Freddie Mercury. I don't think this performance is as good as Malik's performance, but it's still very good, and he's really the reason to see this film. And we also have, Tom Hanks, who plays Colonel Tom Parker, and he was notorious. If you will, he was Elvis's business manager, his partner, if you will. And this movie does a good job of focusing on that relationship. Of course, Parker, yeah, he did help Elvis out in a big way. He did usher him into stardom, but he also manipulated him, prevented Elvis from really doing the things that he really wanted to do. He had a lot of shady business practices, and defrauded him of a lot of money, which he was caught and he was called out for after Elvis's death. And a lot of people accuse him for being the reason Elvis died. And from some point of view, I could see where they would say that, and the movie does touch on that. But listen, like most biopics, they're pretty standard. They're gonna chronicle a certain life, right? Some really take a deep dive into some more darker areas. Some don't. Some just kind of gloss over someone's life just to kind of give you, how in this case, how Elvis began. Circumstances with him going to the army. His marriage with Priscilla. His Hollywood career, the good and the bad, and of course, ultimately his stint in Las Vegas for the last 5-6 years of his life, more or less. And I'll say this because Baz Luhrmann, who directs the film, gave us movies like Romeo and Juliet and Moulin Rouge, the two that come to mind, which are both movies I enjoyed. He has a very good style behind it, and he brings a lot of energy to this film. This is not a great film. This is not like an Oscar contender. I've been hearing that to some degree, particularly when it was debuted at the Cannes Film Festival. I think it's a good movie. It's really well done, very entertaining, but it's a very stylized film, which works for and against it at the same time. And what I mean by that is because, listen, this movie is long. It's just 2 hours and 40 minutes. So it's a lot to take in, particularly in a biopic. And that's going to turn off some people, and I get it. But I'll say this, for the first hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, whatever, that style, that quick edit pace that he has, and a great choice of music here really kind of carries you in the film. It's very entertaining, very lively, but it loses steam at about the last 45 minutes, particularly when his life in Vegas begins. And I really thought, if you're going to go style of a substance, which I think this movie does, I thought they could have really shaved it down to about 2 to 2:15. Would have been more of a sweet spot other than 2:40 and all that. It was a bit much, and that momentum really dies down by the end of the film. You're like, okay, let's move it along here. We get it, right? And if you're going to make it 12 and 40 minutes, okay, why don't you really focus on some of the big hitting issues that Elvis had to deal with? And it touches some of those, right? Because Elvis grew up at a time when, listen, this is, when he was at his peak, a lot of civil unrest, and it touched on things like Martin Luther King's assassination and Robert Kennedy's assassination, and I thought and how it affected him, and they could have really honed in more on that and really gone deep dive into his emotional state. They kind of mention it, gloss over it, and then it's back to just kind of giving us standard stuff a biopic does. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if you're gonna make it 2 hours and 40 minutes, take a deep dive, right? If not, shave it down, because again, it's a very entertaining film, and it's a good movie. And I think if you're an Elvis fan, I think you're really gonna enjoy it. If you're like myself, or you're much younger, don't know a lot about Elvis, or weren't as big into him, there's a lot to really appreciate here, particularly Butler's performance. But ultimately, if that 2 hour and 40 minutes sounds like a lot, it is. I probably recommend for you to watch it at home at your own pace. You can get up and take a break and all that. It's a lot to take in the theater. Like I said, a lot of these biopics really rest upon your investment in the subject matter. Again, if you're an Elvis fan, those 12 and 40 minutes are probably going to fly. Maybe you might think it's not long enough, and do a good job of touching all the major points of his life. And with the music, you're going to be all in. No doubt about the performances that they have on screen, but his performance, all good, all good. But if you're not, some parts are going to be lost on you, and you're all going to feel that runtime. I know I did. But overall, it's a well-made film, very executed very well. Butler's performance is great. Tom Hanks is good. What else is new? And again, if you're a casual fan or a buff for Elvis, I definitely recommend you watch it in the theaters. Just buyer beware with the length. If you're not as into Elvis, I probably say watch it at home. But other than that, listen, it's still a good movie, still well done. Just not, I don't think it's an Oscar contending film. If it does get nominated and all that, I won't complain. But ultimately, in my opinion, I don't think it's that good. But it's a good film, well done, particularly for a biopic. So that being said, Elvis, if you guys watch it, comment below, let me know what you guys thought. And of course, if you haven't done so already, subscribe below and feed money to go to the movies and talk about it afterwards. See you guys next time.